And we're back.
Welcome to the No Direction Podcast, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
It's finally happened. I think I've said that in the last 4 or 5 episodes, but after Second Edition came out and all of the crunch-based hardcovers came out, there was one hardcover that we were expecting at Gen Con. It was put off just by a few weeks. It's upon us. It is the Lost Omens World Guide. And here to talk about it are the developers who worked on it. Eleanor, welcome to the show for the first time.
Glad to be here.
And Luis, welcome to the show for like the 3rd time this year, at least.
Yeah, something like that. Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, there's a big old spider rat right there. That's probably not good. Did you put it in here?
Neat. I just hope, Param, you don't like suddenly fall off screen. We'll know what happens, and there's nothing we can do about it, but I won't be happy. Before we get into the book, Eleanor, do you want to tell us your path to Paizo and your path to Pathfinder?
I'm about as confused as everybody else, if I'm going to be honest here. Yeah, I spent a lot of my misbegotten youth stealing the RPG books that my brother brought home, but I didn't have a chance to play it until I got to college. And for a while, after I graduated from college, I was trying to make my way as a freelancer, break into the industry as an artist, and then I sort of failed sideways into being a Pathfinder writer. And I don't want to complain about that. It's just that when you work really, really hard at one thing, and then you just sort of fail into this thing you were doing as a side hobby, it sort of breaks your all of the lessons you've been brought up to believe about hard work getting you places, or at least in a straight line anyway.
So you went to college for a visual arts major?
No, I went to college for history. Again, sort of zigzagged everywhere.
Okay, but hold on. But you did say something about being an artist. So The idea was your main career would be in history and art would be on the side, and somehow game design became the in the front. It became your main course and everything else is just kind of a side dish?
Let's just say I failed at a lot of things before I got here.
Well, you got yourself into a position that I think a lot of people would be jealous of. So don't think of it as the failures. Think of it as managing to succeed against all odds.
Against my personal efforts.
You were just taking 20 on the skill. But you can't do anymore. Darn it!
Yep.
Just into the wire
just
there.
Before the gate.
And what are some works that you've booked on? What are some books you've worked on before Second Edition's launch?
Worked on as a developer or worked on as a freelancer?
Both.
Yeah. Let's go chronological order, the major milestones.
The first one I worked on was the Occult Bestiary.
Oh, nice.
I like that one.
And Serpent Folk, and one that I don't remember. So, the Vayufak, the Ashura. And then, those were 500-word monster entries. And then, for some reason, Mark Moreland called me up and asked if I wanted to do 7,500 words on the plane of water. Well, that was
those
sort
two
of a
things
jump.
are just connected.
Yeah. So, I worked on Planes of Power. And sort of just down the line, eventually I got here, and the first thing I worked on was helping Luis with...
It was the player companion, Blood of the Ancients.
Yes.
Is what we were first developing.
Well, there was also...
at the same time, it was a Construct Handbook.
Well, that was mostly you, but there was also, what was it? Distant
Realms was the other. Yes, there were 3 books that they kind of just handed us day one to start developing. Actually, in the office on the other side of this wall, in fact.
And I've kind of understood you two are partners, are a team, or is it just that you both happen to have worked on a lot of projects together?
Yeah, we're a team. We showed up at about the same time, and they threw us in an office together, and
then closed the door.
And we wound up working on both the campaign setting and player's handbooks lines together, and it went faster that way and just generally better that way. So, and then they smushed them together into one book. So we're officially both working on those two.
Was this their plan all along?
Well, I think Adam Daigle has told me that the original intent was, well, we'll bring Eleanor, she'll handle the campaign setting stuff, and I would be handling the player companion stuff. And it just so happened to be that because we were kind of thrown into a pile with 3 or 4 different books at once, we worked on both of them, and we're like, oh, this kind of works out. And we just kind of kept trading, and it eventually just reached the point where, no, we work on both of the lines at the same time together, and it's actually, I think, better overall that way.
So it wasn't a plan, it was a scheme, because they convinced you that this was not a plan.
Yep, the sneaky people here at Paizo. Notorious for scheming.
You talked about the 2 lines, the player companion line and the campaign setting line, both beloved lines of first edition, getting smushed together. So what is this mashed together version of those 2 books looking like?
It looks like a 136-page world guide or 136-page character guide.
Yes, man, I love the cover.
You have that on hand.
I love both of those covers, but the character guide cover with the Wendigo is like maybe my favorite cover of the 2 ebooks so far.
Well, just wait till the next book comes out. Oh, we lost our screen is going to sleep. When the books
we
were
can hear
smashed
you if
together.
that's the issue.
Okay, good. We just need to track down a way to unlock the screen again. Anyway, I'll keep talking.
Yeah, so we can still see you too.
Great, that's good to hear. The books, basically we decided that we have all the word count and page count of the 2 books, and we could kind of kill 2 birds with one stone by smashing them together in the form of what we originally called the World Guide. It is now known as the Lost Omens line. And with that, we have been basically getting a chance to cover both of the bases instead of having to strictly be, oh, this is all player stuff and we can't ever explain any of the setting or create new content for the setting. We instead, get to kind of dabble in both. And we didn't like having the line that is clearly, oh, this is only for GMs or this is only for players. We want all of our players to be invested in the setting, assuming they're playing in Golarion, to be invested in the setting as much as anyone else. And we like to inspire GMs to, hey, I found this cool option. I think my players would like to see it. So getting the book smashed together means that we get to get the best of both worlds for that.
And honestly, that was never the thickest of lines. It was like semi-transparent. The player's companion line is just for players, and especially campaign setting line was as much for players as GMs in my experience.
Yeah.
Now, that seems that those are good reasons and to do the merger. But are there any more like practical reasons of the advantages of going a thick hardcover as opposed to softcover books? I mean, was that ever part of the decision-making process of what will this look like on the Barnes & Noble shelf?
I'm definitely sure it was, and I'm sure that it's people higher up that decided that for us. I think another great thing about it is just it's easier to consume when it comes out at a slower pace. If you were used to the player companion line when it first came out, it was every month, and you could have a dizzying amount of options.
No, it was wonderful.
Pretty quickly, but it could become overwhelming if you haven't been keeping up with if you're, for example, society play and suddenly don't know like the last 6 things that came out and you're a GM, it could kind of blindside you, or just all the option paralysis that induced with, hey, here's a fighter, and suddenly there's another 50 combat feats that came out over the past 3 months. That can be kind of a pain to mess with.
And I don't often hear you all say the phrase option paralysis, especially since Pathfinder has been known for having so many options as one of its core marketing strengths. I mean, how much of a decision-making process did that play into the new guideline and what you're putting in it?
I mean, I would say 10 years worth of first edition Pathfinder. It's very easy, especially if you are a new player, to just get overwhelmed by everything. Not to say that having all those options is a bad thing. It's great. I love it. It's the reason why I chose to take the job here in the first place. I love the game so much. But it makes it really tough to traverse the game and the community built around the game if you're not in the know. If you don't know that, hey, there's such and such book, which is obviously the one to go to if you are a fighter, because you get the advanced fighter training options. You might feel like you're missing out, or you might read one of the online guides and they mention all these different things that you have no idea what they are because they're the core rule book. So I think keeping them kind of separated into nice, more manageable chunks via the Lost Omens books makes it much better for both newer players or returning players, or just even as a GM, you can just say, oh, well, suddenly I only have to accept one or two more books as opposed to the 12 that came out this year, plus the other campaign setting line and all this and that. So it's just more manageable in the long run.
Certainly kinder to Pathfinder Society players who have to lug them all around.
Now, I certainly do enjoy Scrooge McDucking into the pile of feats and spell choices that the game provides me, but I have had that experience when I like to bring new players. I always like, every time I start a campaign, I try to get a new player in on it. And when it's character creation session 0 time, and I point them at the literal bookshelf full of 1E books and go, okay, so you create a character, anything on that shelf is fine. And then the pure horror that appears on their face sometimes is comical, to the point that I often want to do a reaction video for it and farm those YouTube viral hits. But I do kind of hope that what you say does end up coming to pass, and it's a little bit less intimidating. If nothing else, then at least they'll be able to read the spines more clearly. Because when you see that those soft covers, like all several hundred of them lined up across the thing, just finding the one you want, and I know what's in them, is sometimes difficult.
It's like a rainbow with no gradient.
There's also a pain to just store. I mean, I have literally every first edition book, because from when I was collecting them as a player, and just trying to store the floppy 32-page ones is just kind of annoying, and you have to buy like
magazine
specific
holders.
Containers for that. Yeah, magazine holders for that. And it makes it impossible to immediately go to the shelf and say, okay, I need blood of the angels, and you find it, unless you're used to your organization and whatnot.
You have to pull them out one at a time.
And then when you get your players loose in those, then you never get them back in the rest spot again.
Nope.
No.
We've lost Ryan. Ryan.
What? No, I'm still here.
Oh, good.
I
just meant figuratively when we're talking about the giant collection of soft covers.
Oh,
I have a giant collection of soft covers. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh,
okay, not compared to you, but yeah, I had they just been a little smaller, had they been comic sized, I would know exactly how to store those and what to do with them. But because they were slightly not comic sized, it was just a mystery of what to do with these besides a pile.
What? How would you do it? I'm confused. What comic-sized books would look like?
Put them in a long box.
Yeah, if it was the same size as a comic book, I would store it like a comic. I would.
Well, you can buy a magazine long boxes.
A little sheaf of plastic, cardboard bag,
and you can buy sleeves for them. I've got tons of those actually. Maybe I should do that.
I suppose I could have, but that's a plan for past Ryan, and he's dead to me.
Oh no! Is that how you leveled up to level 3 podcaster? Did you take level 2 Ryan out back?
Listen, there was a lot of time travel involved, and I'm still a little worried about the implications. But what I'm not worried about is the Lost Omens World Guide.
Now, can you, since you
have
you have it there, can you satisfy curiosity? Can you point the spine at the camera? Do these match how do these look compared to the others?
This is what that looks like.
Oh, they're blue. Are they all blue or just that one? They're all blue.
Okay, so it's the same dressing design but different colors.
You'll be able to tell that those are Lost Omens books
but they'll still look like Pathfinder books.
I mean, aside from the size difference from our RPG books.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard Lost Omens World Guide being referred to as Lost Omens Book 1. Is there a 1 anywhere on the cover of the spine, or is that just an internal term?
That's all been internal. We had the code name of World Guide for the very first book, and then when it came time to start working on the second book, we just started calling it World Guide 2. And so far, we just keep referring to them by World Guide number, whatever, internally.
And that comes up with some debate, because originally when this was first pitched, there was a World Guide subscription, and now it's called the Lost Omens subscription, and all the books have Lost Omens in them. Is this the Lost Omens line, or the World Guide line, or what is the official vernacular we're supposed to use when referring to this line?
To the best of my knowledge, it's the Lost Omens line, because when you subscribe, that's the one that you get. This is the Lost Omens subscription. So that's the official one to go with. If you call it a World Guide, I think we here at Paizo will understand what you mean.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a hard habit to break, because we've been calling it that for quite a while now.
For those of us who will have this in our hands in mere days, or I think some may have already. I don't know if shipments have gone out yet.
Yeah, subscriptions have started, and I know people have been getting it. Comes out 1 week from today, actually.
Woohoo! Let's start with the first one. The Lost Omens World Guide, the one holding the biggest tentpole in the air. What can we expect from the very first one of these books to hit our shelves?
You know, I have to wonder what we haven't previewed on our blog already. Should we just open a page and start reading?
I mean, sure.
What is a World Guide?
So is this a World Guide? Like, is this the new version of the Intercessions campaign setting?
Yeah, the way I've been looking at the first few books in the line is we had the Intercessions World Guide, which was our 256-page look at the Intercessions region. Here's all the nations that we've been adventuring in or will continue to adventure for a while. And then we had books like Intercessions Gods and Intercessions Races to cover some of the further aspects of the setting. And Lost Omens World Guide is the 2E kind of spiritual successor to the Lost Omens World Guide. It's half the size, but it still covers all the same areas and kind of is the go-to book for, I don't know anything about this setting. Let's learn about what we're going to be playing in.
And a concept you all have been previewing and have introduced is that the Intercessions, as we've seen it in the core rulebook, is now 10 distinct regions. Can you tell us a little bit about these regions and how you came up with them?
Yeah, so part of the issue with presenting 40 odd nations
in alphabetical order.
In alphabetical order, 40 odd nations in the Lost Omens World Guide was that it makes it kind of a pain to read through it. When you start, okay, here's Absalom, and then here's Andrian, and then here's Cheliax, and then suddenly you start getting all over the map if you go in order. And a lot of these places would refer to other regions or nations nearby, but you wouldn't have context for what exactly those might be until you reach their respective entries. So if you're reading Cheliax, you don't know about Nadal or Isger until much later in the book. So rather than present it in that same way again, we broke it into what we call 10 meta regions that kind of keep themes and physical locations close by into more sizable, manageable chunks. So instead of reading through Cheliax and then going to Isger and then going to Nadal, you have the old Cheliax region that covers all of those all together, and then you can kind of get the context of how they interact with each other in one section of the book without having to flip back and forth.
Now, when you're saying 10 regions, is this still 10 regions of the Intercessions, or are we talking about Golarion?
10 Intercessions regions.
Is that okay? Do we need to adjust that on the camera? We can't see anymore.
There was the very first blog post had a map up that broke it up. Also, I think it's in the core rulebook that it's broken up in a similar manner. Yeah, so it's all within the Intercessions region. If we, in the future, went to a different region like Arcadia or the entirety of Garud or Tianxia, we might look into doing that as well to keep it in a manageable chunks. But for now, that's just the Intercessions region that we're covering.
Now,
so of these 10 regions, which ones are we going to have familiar terms for and which ones needed new terms?
Yeah, you're probably going to recognize Old Cheliax and the Mwangi Expanse. And I believe the Impossible Lands has been the title for that area since the beginning. Absalom is just named Absalom. So most of what we have is the Golden Road, which is the basically northern Garund and Kadira. The Eye of Dread, which is a kind of suck town. You can probably guess them.
Well, this isn't great. Just throw this map out.
The Broken Lands for the areas up around Mendev and Numeria and Brevoy, and the River Kingdoms, which are probably the most broken of the Broken Lands. But
I'm noticing a trend of
world
decreasing property values.
It's not great, not gonna lie. And then the Shining Kingdoms and the Saga Lands.
That's getting better. Shining Kingdoms that cover all the traditional fantasy fare that we have with things like places like Taldor and Andoran and the Five Kings Mountains and Kion, and Saga Lands cover the probably most well-traveled area, which includes Varissia, and then the lands of the Lindorm Kings and Erison and Realm of the Mammoth Lords. And finally, we also have a pretty self-explanatory High Seas region, which is just the coastal and ocean regions on the west side of the map.
So did the Five Kings Mountain get promoted to full nation status now instead of just the footnote when you talk about Keonan and Andoran?
It gets just as much love as all the other regions, or the other nations and regions of the Shining Kingdoms. So we'd love to expand on that more.
It's
no
like
more dwarf hatred. Wow. I love
we
Second
love
Edition.
Dwarf neglect.
Okay, this is true. They would have to care enough for them to hate them.
Aw.
I care about dwarves.
Glad.
Actually, speaking of dwarves, the old campaign setting book started with dwarves. This was kind of an odd way to start to introduce people to the world of Golarion. So how has the information been sorted out in the new book?
Well, because it's half the size of the original Undersea World Guide, we don't have enough space to present all the regions and all the ancestries and then all the new adventuring options and the planes and the deities and stuff like that. So this book's scope is primarily just the regions that you can go to. It doesn't have any kind of coverage on the ancestries, the people of Golarion. We kind of have that a little bit with the 2 pages or so in the core rulebook, but for the people, kind of like Intercession Races, that's what we have the Lost Omens character guide for, which is our big in-depth look at the people of Golarion, or at least the Intercession region.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of, this
I
sounds like this is... Go ahead.
I was going to say, and technically humans go first in that list before dwarves in that book.
Sorry, I was talking about the original one, the one for under 3.5.
Oh, the old one, the one printed on newspaper.
Campaign setting book just started with. Is that really expensive? I only have a PDF. I was about to say I might have to look up online prices, but I can't sell a PDF.
Yeah, it is a hard to get one, and like I said, it was made on like the cheapest of cheap print paper too, so it was an interesting read.
Oh wait, was that the cheap print sign or the money sign that you did?
The really rough paper.
Oh, okay.
I was just doing really rough paper. Yeah, it's like if you get something that's print on demand from Drive-Thru RPG now, and they chose the cheapest version. That's the kind of stuff that book was printed on, and I love that book to death because it's the book that got me into Pathfinder. Because my store ordered that book by mistake for me when I meant to order a different book, and then I said, this looks interesting, I'll buy it anyway. They gave it to me for a discount, and then I devoured it in one day and became addicted to Pathfinder in the next day, and came to the store, like literally opening of the store the next day, said, order me all the Pathfinder books now.
And they haven't stopped.
No. But seriously, so this, because it's the World Guide, and it sounds like there's not a ton of character options in this particular book then.
I don't know about that.
Have to find a ton.
I mean, I don't know if it's, half of the book is character options, but we have the 10 regions, and at the end of each region, we have a section that presents new backgrounds that are kind of associated with the nations and people of that region, as well as a new archetype with each of those.
Okay,
so the High Seas ends with the Red Mantis assassin because Meteor Galti Island is part of the region.
I bet everybody expected that to be a pirate, but no, it's a bug ninja.
We wanted to tie as many of the archetypes as we could to existent content you might have known from first edition. So we have things like the Hell Knight Armiger or the Lion Blade in here that are all stuff that, oh, hey, I recognize that from first edition. We want people to be able to play those characters as soon as they can.
Yeah, since this was the world guide and not the RPG line, we wanted to connect the archetypes in here to Golarion as much as possible.
So these will be their first glance then at a archetype that isn't a multi-class. So can you pick one and sort of walk us through how it works?
Roll a d10.
Which one would you like?
I'm hosting an RPG podcast and I don't have a d10 handy. I have this gigantanormous
d20. Poor dice, poor. There we go, d10. 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Golden Road. One of my favorite of the meta regions. So the Golden Road,
which is a cool name, like because it's a desert region, right? It's
a desert region, but it's also there's a lot of trade, important trade that happens there.
It's also an area that has an ocean in the middle of it.
Well, that breaks up the whole Golden Road imagery.
Yeah. So anyway, before I go into that, I want to show off the big intro to the section, which has a cool, awesome piece of art that goes across the whole thing, plus a little map here that kind of tells you all the different cool locations we mentioned in the book, plus I think maybe even a few more that are just, hey, this is exciting, go figure out what that means.
So that spreads when y'all preview them at Paizo Con, and so there are some high-res previews of those spreads out there if you all want to go look them up. Excited me for 2 major reasons, like super joy squee in the back of the room while streaming reasons. First was the fact that you all did those character point of view vistas, which instantly sell. Like, I wish so many more RPG books would do this to actually show the world like characters would see it, so that they can understand what a region is like and play and role play with it, instead of, well, this is where so many role playing game products just show us the world map in whatever world map software it was generated in, and it's like, well, this slightly brown region must be a forest, and it's going to be the same geome as all the other forests I have, and random train.
Oh goodness.
And the other reason that I was super into it is we finally have just a tiny little taste of it, just a little bitty taste of it, but the Golarion Atlas. The almanac, right, the Golarion Almanac, because it's like talks about major trade and like how real people will, like, stuff to help flesh out role playing in these regions by what the people do for a living when they're not slaying dragons and being part of, random encounters and or plot MacGuffin kidnappies.
Yeah, for me, getting the architecture in this book nailed down was especially important, because certainly when we got into a couple of locales, I had no idea what they looked like. Nobody could tell me what they looked like. We just got like maybe 3 or 4 adjectives describing it. I showed off on my Twitter Quantium, which is one of my favorite illustrations from the book. And before that, I didn't have a clue what anything in the city of Nyx or the country of Nyx would look like. So I just threw some pictures and adjectives at an artist, and they came back with that gorgeous picture. And now I know what I'm walking into when I walk into one of the most magical regions in the Inner Sea region.
Awesome.
Yeah. So now all you need to do is take all those wonderful vistas and then make an in-world Golarion calendar.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you guys want products, Eric Mona is the person to get on the case of. Please tweet him, put forum threads at him, email him.
The the cool almanac kind of look was something that our art director Sarah Robinson brought forth. She had like travelers guides that kind of at a glance would give you things like, oh, here's cool places to eat and like kind of stuff to see. And we took that as what we used to base the kind of presenting this first look as, because it covers things like, oh, what nations are here, what kind of people live here, what languages do they speak, and then, as we mentioned, what resources do they have. And we have little icons that'll tell you, they have things like spices and magic items and fruits and vegetables and stuff. So it's really great.
Do you have restaurants? Do you have cool places to eat in Absalom?
Not in this book.
Oh, wait.
We have passed around the thought of Cookbook of Golarion before, which is another thing you should totally bug Eric Mona about.
Okay, everybody. So we're going to put Eric Mona's email address in the show notes. Please spam it all the heck. So remember, we want calendar and Cookbook of Golarion. I mean, we wanted the Golarion Almanac, and it looks like that was at least a partially successful campaign, so...
Just remember
I can't
to
recommend
address every
Intercessions
email.
Taverns for a bit of restaurants.
So we were talking about the archetype in this section. Is that how
the archetype? Okay. So yes, the archetype is an existing. Actually, this is the third time it's shown up in Pathfinder. It's the living monolith, which was originally a 3/5 prestige class from the Assyrian Player Companion book that later got updated to a full-on Pathfinder prestige class in People of the Sands, I believe. And now here it is again, now as an archetype. So, I mean, if you know how to multi-class in second edition, just take a standard class multi-class, like, fighter into wizard or rogue dedication, then you already know how to do that for the most part with the archetypes that are here in the world guide. Mm-hmm. There's only one difference here, is that in addition to their prerequisites, each of the dedication feats that you use to get into the archetype has an additional line called access. Mm-hmm. So all of these archetypes start off as uncommon. Like you can't just stroll into the Red Mantis headquarters and say, "Hey, make me a Red Mantis," or stuff like that. We kept all of those uncommon, so GMs can decide, okay, yeah, I want to allow that into my game, or make my players work for it, or whatever the case might be. But this access line kind of overrides that a little bit. With the access line, if you meet the qualifications for the access, suddenly it's not uncommon for you. It's just something that you have available to you and you could take, so long as you meet the other prerequisites. So here for the Living Monolith, it says your access is, if you're from the Golden Road region, then you can become a Living Monolith as long as you meet the other prerequisites of knowing Ancient Assyriani and Sphinx and being trained in crafting.
So this feels like a reversal of how rarity is usually handled. So normally it's like from an option point. Like if I'm Goblin, I could get access to all Goblin weapons, whereas this is saying, well, we haven't contended for this, so here's the other way that you can qualify for this.
Yeah, and then we have an access line for all the other archetypes here. So, for example, the Pathfinder Agent is uncommon unless you are from Absalom, then you have access to it. Or the Last Wall Sentry, which is the Eye of Dread archetype. Again, uncommon unless you're from the Eye of Dread region. So stuff like that. And we play with that a lot with the archetypes here, and then later with some of the other uncommon options in future books, like the character guide.
So let's say I take my Living Monolith dedication.
Level 2 feat, yep.
What does that give me?
I'm just going to read this verbatim at this point.
Yes.
Story time.
It says, you've begun to inscribe a magical stone called the Ka Stone that you will someday tie to your soul. You gain knowledge of ancient Assyrian and a connection to your nascent Ka Stone. So that's all the fun flavor. If you fail a recovery check while dying, your dying condition does not increase. If you critically fail, your dying condition increases by only 1. You also become trained in ancient Assyrian lore, or expert if you're already trained in that. So you get to learn some cool stuff about ancient Assyrian, and it's very hard to kill you all of a sudden.
I mean, that's lines up with being a living monolith.
Yeah.
I like the idea of if you are a monk living on monolith, you have a cost stone and a key pool.
Yeah. Yep. And then from there, we have several other feats that you can take, ranging from 4th through 14th level that you can take as few or as many as you want, just like you would with any other multi-class. But like any other multi-class, you have kind of locked yourself into the living monolith for a while, where the dedication feat says you can't select another dedication feat until you have at least 2 other feats from the living monolith archetype. So you can't suddenly go be a red mantis until you dedicate yourself just a bit more to being a living monolith. There is a wrinkle there, though.
Oh, no.
Having the great power of foresight, we got to plan things a bit more in advance with the way things work. A lot of the player companions were very kind of siloed off in their own independent thing. You would find a new cool archetype or a new rule option, and then that would probably be the only time it would ever show up again, unless it got brought into one of the core rule books, which was kind of a
crapshoot. Yeah, we had always worked on the assumption that not everyone had bought all 500 million of those little 32-page floppies. And the downside to that is that we usually did not cite those floppy books, the player companions, when doing other player companions, which led to some weird things like the Solarkin, Geniekin variant of the Firekin, the Ifrit, could not use the Solar bloodline because that was in another player companion. And now that we have these hardcover books and it's much easier to get your hands on them, and we are working with the Archives of Nethys to keep the PRD as updated as possible, we're branching out into allowing books that are later on to reference earlier books in our line.
I love so much of what you just said.
I mean,
working with Archives of Nethys is really exciting, and tying things together and making sure that it doesn't just feel like these self-contained vacuum books that are supposed to also all be fleshing out Golarion, that there's going to be a little more arc to the player, what is now the player companion line. That's exciting.
So we actually have an example of that in the book here already. So the old Cheliax archetype is the Hell Knight Armiger. So the Hell Knight in training, essentially. And the dedication feat, like always, says you can't select another dedication feat, blah, 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 unless you have 2 feats from the Hell Knight Armiger type. It does have an exception, though. It says you can't select another dedication feat except dedication feats for higher positions within the Hell Knights. So we planned for that in advance, and we have in the Lost Omens character guide 2 Hell Knight related archetypes. One that is the full-on Hell Knight, and the other is the Hell Knight Signifer, the kind of magic related Hell Knight. And both of those, you are free to take dedication feats or further feats from that by ignoring that 2 feat restriction, because the Hell Knight Armiger builds into the Hell Knight. That's you kind of moving up in the ranks of the Hell Knights and becoming a full-fledged member. So we get to play with we already break some of the rules about how dedication works and stuff like that by getting to tie different archetypes together.
Yeah, so the Hell Knight starts at feat 6, so you can just grab that Hell Knight Armiger, possibly grab another Hell Knight Armiger feat down the line, and then at 6 you can become a full-fledged Hell Knight. But there is the prerequisite: you have to pass the Hell Knight test.
I just was GMing a certain adventure you all released recently that has that Hell Knight test in it. That's not a fun test.
No. But that sort of also locks it into an in-game thing. You can't just say off screen, oh yeah, I totally killed the demon and now I'm a Hell Knight. You can't take that feat until you are level 6, and you are going to have to beat that demon or devil.
You got to prove yourself.
You got to prove it, and you're probably going to have to prove it in game.
I could do it in downtime, right?
Downtime action.
Roll a percentile, and on 100 you succeed. Otherwise, you die.
Well, since we know I have a D10 handy, first roll's a 0. 1.
Oh,
sorry that you
far from
died.
100 as possible.
well, there goes that gnome we built.
Oh no, torso test. Actually, speaking of downtime, are the different modes of play addressed, or is that like how are the different modes of play addressed in the Lost Omens line?
The line doesn't really address. They're more, as you know, setting material and granting options. We do get to play with those and actually present additional actions and downtime activities in the adventure paths and the module, the Pathfinder Adventures modules. We actually, in even just the Age of Ashes Player's Guide, presented a new downtime activity that you can start using. So when you're playing adventures, we will grant those. But for just reading up on the setting, I don't know if we have any right now, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't have any in the future where it makes sense. You know, if we do the big book of cuisine and stuff, there might be a night on the town downtime activity where you go try out all the drinks or all the food in a certain district of the city or something.
Oh, pub crawl.
Yeah, the pub crawl action.
I'm writing that down.
Now, this is a good time to remind everyone that we record these episodes in front of a live Twitch audience, and if you are currently in our Twitch audience, and boy, there's a lot of you today, I'm excited to. I'd be here for Luis and Eleanor too. You can ask questions and we will relay them to our guests throughout the episode. So please, if you have any questions about the Lost Omens books or any questions for Luis or Eleanor, get them into the chat. We will collect them and ask them along.
And I will echo some of the things the chat has been saying. Hidden Twig and Dungeon Novice were kind of going back and forth about how the new archetypes and the access is a good way of doing the prerequisites for a prestige class so that you have world flavor dictating how you can get into these rather than a series of feats and skill points that you need to have.
And it's still the same kind of prerequisites you're used to, where I got to have the right training and stuff like that. But yeah, we wanted to encourage players to tie themselves into the setting a lot more, and that I think the Access line does really great about doing that. Oh, well, of course I want to be a Red Mantis. I guess I will have been in Medio Galti Island for all my life, and now I'm trained to do that. And then you can kind of build your backstory and get yourself more committed to those kind of choices that you're going to make. And
it also helps to GMs sort of build hooks around this. As if somebody wants to be this and they're not from Medio Galti Island, it's you're going to have to find a Red Mantis and get them to teach you somehow. You can't just take it off screen. Your GM has to decide that you've put in the effort to get it.
We have a question from Living Lava Being, sorry. Does the World Guide provide more information on local language options, and have any languages changed or been updated from first edition?
Oh, they also mentioned maybe any changes with access to languages being more common, such as Thessalonian, with the recent changes at the end of certain APs.
So the fun little almanac at the beginning does have a list of commonly spoken languages in that particular meta region.
You get a peoples and languages section of the almanac.
So that's always a great reference for what should I be taking? I think you can look in the Saga Lands really quick. Having the book here makes it very handy to answer questions. You can look in the Saga Lands to see how common we made Thessalonian.
I will also call out, I really like all the little iconography that you're adding to these books. That really helps make the mnemonics easier.
Yeah, so Thessalonian is definitely on that list of languages for the Saga Lands region. So yeah, that makes it very easy to say, oh yeah, I have Thessalonian because I'm from New Thassalon or from Brissi or just from around the area. We have made some changes to the language names here and there that you would have seen in the core rulebook. For example, the giant language is now called Jotun and stuff like that. But for the most part, all the languages you're used to seeing are still around, still have common, still have all the ancestry languages and all the different ethnicity languages like Skald or Varisian are still around as well, and they're listed on these language lists as well, where it makes sense.
So I can't joke that the giant is just common, but a really big font.
You can still joke.
Oh, I can still make jokes? Oh, good.
But now
I can still joke.
But now
There's
all
a
our
whole
hillbilly
damn
ogres
activity
speak in
to
a
tell
Norse
jokes.
accent.
That's true.
Perrin brought up that with campaign settings being done from first edition. So we know that one of the ideas of second edition was the timelines advanced and all of the adventure paths are concluded, all the first edition ones. So how is that integrated into the books?
Well, we have, if you remember, the kind of early section of the Lost Omens World Guide had something like 3 or 4 pages straight of just, here's the entire timeline of the world.
Yeah.
We have that kind of here. It's along the sidebar, so it's much easier to consume. You don't have to just have giant walls of text. But in addition to that, because that only covers the kind of high-level things like, Earthfall and then Eridan's death, stuff like that, it can't cover all of the regions. So each individual region has its own specialized, personalized timeline as well that gives you information on what's been going on that is relevant to that particular region. We won't talk about, hey, the Rune Lords were up to no good in 4707 in the Absalom region, because that really is more something that's important to the Saga Lands region. And in these timelines, we will be bringing up some of the important events that happen in the AP. So, for example, here, 4707 mentions Rune Lord Karzug and some of the no good he was up to, and kind of explains a little bit about what might have been going on. And then stuff that you read there, we try to also integrate into the flowing text here that explains, Varisia and New Thassalon will mention things like what happened in the Rise of the Rune Lords and Churn of the Rune Lords APs.
Yeah, we've been trying to present the text of these entries as somebody coming, for somebody who's coming to the sitting right now. And that means presenting them as we assume them to be in the current year of Golarion. So it's taking all of those AP endings and assumptions and updating the countries that were affected by them to contain those in their history. So we just sort of assume that New Thassalon is their spoilers. We put relationships between New Thassalon and, say, Land of the Lenorm Kings in here. And historical events that happened after New Thassalon appeared. Also, spoilers, one of the Lenorm Kings didn't come out of that so well. And of course, some of them were more obvious than others. Since we illustrated a piece of recent history for the Saga Lands, which is the dimension of crystalline coming out of its time bubble and into Varisia.
Cool.
And while we do cover every aspect of what happened, or at least when it had an effect on the world, for example, the Strange Aeons doesn't have as much of an effect in the Inner Sea region proper, so it doesn't come up very much. But where we do mention things, it is kind of a high-level thing. We say, hey, Rune Lord Karzug was defeated in 4707, but we don't say by whom or how exactly it happened or, whether there were any repercussions from it. We wanted to give you just enough information to explain kind of the high-level ending results of the APs without kind of invalidating, well, my players, they were all rogues and they beat the Rune Lords. But this thing says it was a mixed group of paladins and fighters and clerics and wizards. But, we don't want to say that kind of stuff so you can keep your results in your game going how you like.
Oh, I can tell you that it was not my group that stopped Karzug.
Oh, dear.
Oh, okay. I think I saw a group on Reddit that accidentally woke up Mar, and that group didn't go so good.
Oh, boy. Yeah, waking up a great old one is never good business.
So we've talked a lot about the World Guide, but this is just the one of 4 books you all have announced in this line. In October, we're going to get the character guide.
Yes, Lost Omens character guide.
Yes, with the cool Wendigo cover.
Yes, lovely book, which is partially inspired by a little podcast I like to listen to called No Direction.
How so?
So I think a while back, I can't remember the exact episode, but I know you mentioned, Ryan, actually, that you kind of wish there were more expansion on things like the dwarves. You know, we have our humans who are, you know, you can be a Verissian human or a Taldan human or a Kelid human, things like that. Or you could be a dwarf.
Yep.
There's no real
there's
granularity.
No ethnicity too. Yeah.
To that. And that inspired me to come up with the idea for what I pitched at this book, which is, hey, let's learn more about the people and learn who you are, which then became eventually the Lost Omens character guide, in which we present two big things, big factions that are important in the Inner Sea region, and of course, all the ancestries and the different ethnicities that make up each of these ancestries, not just the humans, but all of them.
Yeah, we've
Tell me
certainly
about the gnomes.
we've certainly had other ethnicities mentioned for non-human people in Golarion previously, but they were scattered everywhere, and good luck finding them. So this was our opportunity to put them all together in one big primer to give to new players and say, here's all the people you can be, or certainly a lot of them.
Yeah, or even expand where some of these ancestries didn't have them. Halflings, we kind of ran into. Well, there's one other group we've ever mentioned in lore beforehand, and it's kind of tough. So yeah, hey, let's talk about gnomes for a bit.
Yeah.
Gnomes of the Inner Sea, these wonderful, wonderful gnomes with wonderful, wonderful hair.
Lovely.
So gnomes are kind of different compared to.
Yeah, you picked the weird one.
That's good.
Yep,
It lets
of
us
course
kind of
he did.
explore the edge, how far we push the term ethnicity here. So with humans, we have the different ethnicities. They're all over the world. With gnomes, they aren't really relegated to any particular region of the world. The way it works for them is more so how their connection to magic manifests than anything else. So gnomes, they're from the first world, and when they're first born, they kind of are more in tune with magic fonts and ley lines and things like that around them, and whatever kind of magic is around them kind of helps shape who they are as they grow. We have in second edition, we now have 4 different traditions tied to magic. We have arcane, divine, occult, and primal, and that seemed like a perfect way to expand the gnomes. So we have here among the gnomes ones that are tied to each of these traditions. We have things like the Fel gnomes, which are more occult in nature, and the Feychild gnomes, which they still have that connection to the first world, and they're more primal in nature. Glimmer gnomes, who are the divine in nature, and the Keenspark, which are arcane in nature. And each of those have their own. They live different lives, like an ethnicity would have different cultures and traditions and things like that. The different groups of gnomes based off tradition each have their own separate ways of life.
Yeah, the
Sorry,
interesting and weird thing about the gnomes is that their concept of an ethnicity doesn't really rely on genetics. You could have 2 gnome parents that are like Feychild, they're all happy and into primal sorts of magic, and if they happen to be around something kind of creepy when they have a kid, that kid might be a Fel gnome and might look completely different than their parent anyway. Just the fact that they have so many available eye and hair colors, and they might not look anything like their parents.
So it's tied into magic, but does that mean I should look at magic casters when I'm rolling up these gnomes? Okay, good.
So what it is that the gnomes used to be denizens of the first world, and they got thrown out or kicked out or fled or whatever, and that sort of severed their connection. They can't be denizens in the way they used to be. Their souls are going to go into the boneyard when they die and not get recycled like true first world people are. And that's sort of left kind of we wouldn't say like a hole, but like it left something that can be affected by the world around them. That's sort of how we've described gnomes surviving. Like some of them, the Smurf Neblin just sort of soaked up all these bad occult forces and turned in, or not Smurf Neblin. What are they?
Fell gnomes?
Spriggans.
Oh, the Spriggans, yes.
The Spriggans like sort of soaked in all of these horrible curses and corruptions and became something exceptionally mean. And First World Gnomes we've described as, needing to keep generating these positive feelings, or the bleaching sets in. They have to sort of generate some kind of magical something to replace what they lost from the first world. So what we have expanded on here is that the different ethnicities of gnomes sort of think about generating that thing to replace the magic they lost in different ways. The most obvious of these would be the Keenspark gnomes, who they don't really go around and play pranks. They focus their obsessions on perfecting their field of study. They want to drive forward. They want to make their own excitement. And that can mean that they're sort of asinine perfectionists and nobody likes them. But that's sort of an example of how these different gnomes live different lives. Like if you're a Keenspark gnome, you just really want to get into the nitty gritty of your thing and explore it to the fullest. Like really, you could be an alchemist, really driving for science. You could be a wizard. You could be forefront, what do you call them? Scholar of theology. It doesn't matter what class you are. It's how you are trying to relate to the world around you to avoid bleaching.
Another thing we were looking to avoid with these ethnicities is tying them to heritages. So we wanted to avoid tying any mechanics to these ethnicities. So you can be a Keenspark gnome or a Glimmer gnome or a Fell gnome, and then take whatever heritage you want from the core rulebook, and it's still applicable. We didn't want to say, Keenspark gnomes are always the ones that are trained in Arcana because they're the best at Arcana. No, we don't want to say that kind of stuff. We want to give you interesting hooks for your background and making your character without worrying about, is it the mechanically best option for, the cleric that I'm making? Well, of course I have to be Glimmer gnome because they're more divine in nature. No, you can be a Fell gnome but still be a cleric, for example.
Yeah, and obviously, if you sort of applied that to humans, it's you're from Garen, so you take the Garen person fee. It's sort of maybe we don't want to go there. So we tried to avoid that for non-human ancestries too. We have suggestions for each of these ethnicities of what they might take, but they're just suggestions. You don't have to take any of them. Now, obviously, there are probably going to be some exceptions. Like if you are playing an aquatic elf, you will probably take a hypothetical aquatic elf heritage that we don't have in this book, but we might make down the line, because otherwise you will drown and die. For the most part, we try and avoid locking you into something.
But even in that situation, you could be an aquatic elf who has learned to live on land later on and have a different heritage and just not drowned by never going into the water.
So these are things called islands. We're big fans.
Great.
So mechanically speaking, where do these ethnicities fit into character creation?
They are flavor. They are all flavor.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. So then if I just choose not to have an ethnicity, or one person in my group doesn't have that book and everyone else does, and everyone's got ethnicity but that one player, it's not like they're missing out on anything.
No, nothing at all.
Presumably they'd have a background, and probably that sort of suggests an ethnicity. I don't know. Maybe they sprung fully formed from the head of a statue.
You don't need an ethnicity to complete your character. So mechanically, you are ready to go with or without an ethnicity.
We are providing world lore so that you probably know what ethnicity you are, but you don't. It's not a rules thing.
Though I do take exception to the you're not missing out on something, because that's that's like me asking my professor, I missed class, did I miss anything important? It doesn't break your character, but there's definitely worth to these options.
Okay, you're not behind the curve mechanically.
Right.
Well, to put it a different way, if you don't want to play in Golarion, nothing Like lacking this book you can make your own setting and whatever and use the options from this book and it won't be weird. Let's put it that way. It's not going to be weird if you decide to use totally different information than this book because none of the rules options are super tied into the flavor.
Our Game of Gnomes Westeros game still works.
Those are all going to be fell gnomes.
Earlier in the chapter, we saw a picture of a gnome with some crazy hair that Dungeon Novice has quite the obsession with. He brought her up before you even showed that picture, so I guess it's been previewed somewhere.
Yeah, we had it as part of our diversity panel at Gen Con.
Oh, we should show them the other gnomes.
Oh, yeah.
Put it real close to the camera. There we go. Oh, those are wonderful. I love that art. I love everything about that. Who's the artist?
Oh,
sorry for asking the hard question.
Couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
We could read every artist that worked on this book. I do not know who did those gnomes off the top of my head.
Still, that's really good art.
Yeah.
Now, Dungeon Novice was wondering which ethnicity of gnome is what he's calling hair gnome.
Hair gnome is, it has a little caption. She's a Fey child gnome.
Oh, that makes sense.
So apparently gnomes were the off-the-wall ethnicities. Is there a more prototypical ethnicity that you want to explain just so people get a better idea of what the intention of this new flavor was?
Well, pick one. How about that? Have the audience or you pick an ethnicity that isn't gnomes and probably isn't goblins.
Yeah, one of the other ancestries. And we can talk about how we landed on things for them.
All right, we'll wait for chat to come up with one, and whoever in chat speaks up first will get to their choice. That'll be the official choice. Oh, there we go. Bard Wannabe wants halflings.
Halflings. Yay.
I'm just going to get out of frame and let Louis go on this one.
So we had a kind of a weird situation with halflings because it was they're one of the ancestries that have been, to the best of our knowledge, at least in the setting that we've explained, around just as long as humans have. And we didn't initially have like a cool, interesting way to come up with ethnicity for them like we did with gnomes, where it's like, oh, we'll tie them to the 4 traditions of magic, or dwarves whose ethnicities are kind of based off elevation. But eventually what we landed on is halflings, because they're always around other groups of people, probably developed in the same way that humans did. So initially we tell you, oh, if you're a halfling, just go look at the human ethnicities and you can map yourself to one of those ethnicities just as well as you could a human, and that would still make sense. But of course, halflings aren't always just tied to the lives of humans or other ancestries around them. And we also wanted to present groups of halflings here and there that kind of developed on their own. Those were inspired by the one group that we had initially, which was the Sango halflings, which are a group of halflings that developed in the Wongi Expanse kind of independently of anyone else. And based on that, Ron Lundeen gave us a great set of, I guess the gnomes were written by John Compton, so there you go. Ron Lundeen gave us cool ideas for the halflings here, and what we have are just pockets of halfling settlements and civilizations and groups of people that developed independently. We have, or just kind of lives unique lifestyles enough that are so distinct that they're their own culture or ethnicity. So we have, Chilexian halflings are, they live such particular lives, as most of them being slaves, that we wanted to address them. But then we have newer ones like the Jeriks, who are kind of like, they're halflings from the Garoon. They're from the Barrier Wall Mountains, which are kind of the ones that run along the south of Assyrian and Thuvia and Rahadu. And they just kind of hang out in the mountains on their own and climb around and jump around a lot and live kind of what I would call tougher lifestyles. They're out in the sun all day. They climb and are really... they eschew clothing a lot. So if you ever stumble upon a Jerik settlement, you might see a lot of naked halflings running around, climbing on things and wrestling. Just, that's because that's how they play and stuff.
Are we sure they're not mountain goats?
They they might give mountain goats a run for their money in terms of climbing around, but the society kind of is based around kind of breaking up into smaller groups, and some of these specific groups that are like really tiny, like I don't know, adventuring party size, 4 or 5 Jareks. They call bill bands. And these bill bands kind of set off and go do their own thing. So they're just like this little personal club that go and go do things, and they all give themselves fun names like Winkle's Freedom Fighters. And that's one group of halflings that we presented here, and then we have others that are so displaced from the inner sea region that they just are completely different, like the Oathbond halflings. Earlier we mentioned in the Saga lands there was a time-locked dimension, the Christieland, which is actually time-locked from the time of ancient Absalom. So 10,000 years ago, there were halflings stuck in this city, displaced outside of time, and suddenly they've been released into the world again. And what I call the time halflings, the Oathbonds, are now here, and they're completely unique from any other halflings that you've ever seen because they've kind of been they're halflings out of time.
If you just imagine like this Babylonian city of just suddenly dropping into the middle,
and then all the halflings scattered out.
Yeah, the Babylonian halflings.
Like introducing bunny rabbits to Australia. This is not going to go well.
So each of the main halfling groups here that we present have like different, unique, kind of isolated upbringings. So we have the Marini halflings, which are kind of off the edge of the map from Iobaria, and the Oathbonds, which are from East Astalon, the Sango, who are down in the Mwangi Expanse, and then the Ulams, who kind of live nice, simple lifestyles by hanging out in the Verduran forest and are kind of left alone. So, and then we talk about how you can be an adventurer and what kind of classes they might take. So, for example, an Oathbond might end up being a cleric or a rogue or a wizard based on what you can read here about how they are very curious about learning about this new world that is around them.
And the time halflings would all be rogues, and they would be time bandits?
Yeah, exactly.
So all right, I'm just going to say, so I like this because now I'm not an expert on the campaign setting, but I do know, a fair amount. And it just feels like whenever halflings are brought up in a campaign setting context, it was like in Cheliax, they're slaves. And that really seemed to be the only flavor for halflings that I knew, or at least regularly saw. So it's nice to hear about other halflings and some really interesting variations on that particular ancestry.
Oh, don't worry, Ryan. There's slaves in Assyrian and Kadira, too.
Phew. Param, you were going to say something?
No, that was...
Were you going to make the same point?
Yeah.
Huh. All right, well, we've got a couple of questions. Lava Being wants to know about the new ancestries in the book and if they have heritages and ethnicities.
Oh, boy. So the new heritages don't have as much space as the new ancestries don't have as much space as the core ancestries. The core ancestries in the core rulebook have 4 pages that tell you, here's the basics, here's all the stats you need, and here's your ancestry feats, and then we get to expand on it from there. So what we're doing here with the new ancestries is kind of giving the same core output of, here's the basics, here's the ancestry feats, and here's the stats you need. So the hobgoblins, leshies, and lizard folk each have 4 pages to kind of get you started. And they have heritages, because you kind of need that for an ancestry, but they don't talk much more about specific ethnicities or anything in depth.
We have a little bit of information.
How come they weren't given the same treatment as the core ancestries?
Space
primarily, and also because we want, first and foremost, to expand on the core and then work out from there. So basically, they are a step behind. So next time we look at hobgoblins and leshies and lizard folk, of course, we're going to try to then expand on them with ethnicities and more options and stuff like we did with the core ancestries.
If you keep an eye on the blog, we will be putting up previews of the 3 new ancestries in this book, in that blog, but we can definitely show off some other stuff here.
Well, I remember I think it was the 2019 and Beyond seminar from Gen Con. It starts At some point, somebody says that once we get to explaining why these are the ancestries in the book, you'll understand why they were the 3 ancestries in the book.
Oh, yes.
And I never feel like I actually did understand why those were the 3 ancestries in this book.
So there were a lot of questions as to why did we pick hobgoblins and leshies and lizard folk as opposed to something that I feel like a lot of more people were interested in seeing, like orcs or catfolk or tengu or the planar scions like Aasimar and Tiefling. And that's because we had to keep very quiet that we knew up and coming we were going to announce the APG, which had all of those that you were already expecting.
Okay.
And instead, what we wanted to do is focus on ones that are more directly tied to the setting in some way, or at least tie them, that we have a good reason to talk about them, because hobgoblins recently had a whole AP where they were the focus, and now they have their own nation. So let's talk about them. Leshies are kind of our take on leshies in particular are kind of our own thing. So we want to bring them back and show you, hey, these are the Pathfinder leshies that you're used to seeing. And then lizard folk, I think, is one that a lot of people have been asking for, and was even actually just off of the list, like in terms of popularity, that didn't make the cut to the APG. It's like, oh, we've always wanted to expand on them more and talk about them more. So now's our good chance to do that.
So being first runner-up gets them released 9 months early?
Yeah, they got lucky.
Yeah. That just happened to be how it worked out. But since this was a world guide, not like a huge RPG setting book, this was an opportunity to focus on things that could be more like prominent and important in Golarion, and like just for various reasons of space, just never got that sort of treatment. And we wanted to like introduce them into our world in a way so that they weren't like afterthoughts. They weren't like, oh, I like these from the bestiary, and now I'm going to get like some stat blocks and maybe half a page of flavor text, and that's it. They never felt that much integrated into the world. So this contextualizes them as adventurers. They're unlikely adventurers. They're not necessarily found everywhere. They're not necessarily appropriate everywhere.
One could say they are uncommon ancestries.
like I've said in the upcoming blog, your hobgoblin fighter is probably not going to go over so well in the War for the Crown AP. Just maybe not. Maybe put that to the side for another game. But at the same time, because we have a new hobgoblin nation, and that nation is sort of the center of a lot of change in the region, hobgoblins are important to the world now. And so we wanted like that as sort of context for these things. And likewise, leshies and lizard folk we like to go into the jungles of Golarion and play around and wreck some stuff and leave. And we don't so much use them as a place that people are from. And so this is sort of, we've been poking places like Verduin Forest for a long time. Now the leshies and the lizard folk are coming out to poke us.
Very literally with the new Pathfinder Society faction.
Is the intent for these ancestries then to be more of a tool for a GM to flesh out NPCs from those ancestries?
No.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. So we consider these ancestries to be tools for a GM in a way that, you can, as a GM, say, I want to put this ancestry as a player race in this game I'm running, or possibly I do not want this anywhere near where I'm running. So if you can use this to customize it, oh, hey, I'm playing in the Mwangi Expanse, and this sidebar has mentioned some lizard folk down there, around this, some of the cities down there. I want to show off the uniqueness of this campaign by allowing you to take a lizard folk as a PC. So like in older books where we like Karatur or that sort of thing, people would have like different base assumptions for what your common player races were. Like maybe you have hobgoblins over there instead of halflings or whatever. Or somebody bans elves and says, oh, no, you can only take these Asian-inspired races.
Oh,
so I think the best way to consider these are like modular ways to customize your game, your setting. Just like pick them up, drop them in, and like say, oh, you can't play so and such. You can't play a dwarf, but you can play a leshy, and that already sets your setting apart by changing the base assumptions of your world.
It also, as a GM, just does give you some more flavor and information on some of these ancestries. If you look at like the first edition Lizard Folk, you have like a paragraph or so that explains who they are, and then you never hear from them again. So having these lets you flesh out them a bit more if you want to use them as more nuanced NPCs or more nuanced adversaries. You now have the information you can work off of to work with that. So you can put that into your game how you like.
Now, besides the new ancestries and the old ancestries getting attention, another big pitch for this was factions, and you mentioned faction monsters?
Yes, absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the questions we wanted to answer with this book is, who are you? And we did that by presenting more stuff on your ancestry so you can learn more about who you are. Whereas the Lost Omens World guys, where are you from or where are you going? And gods and magic is what do you believe? But who are you may not necessarily all be just tied to, what ancestry are you playing? It could be, hey, I'm a Pathfinder or I'm a Hell Knight, and that means a lot as well in the setting. So we wanted to present some of the bigger mover and shakers in the form of the organizations that we have in our setting, and also to kind of bring them into second edition and get them ready to go for people to start playing with pretty early on in the game's lifetime. So for that, we covered 5 different organizations here that are kind of the more prominent ones in the Inner Sea region. We still talk about some of the other ones that we've mentioned here. So we don't have enough space to cover the Bellflower Network and the Eagle Knights and the Red Mantis Assassins, but we do mention them here a bit. But we covered what we consider the more prominent ones in the setting. So we have things like the Pathfinder Society, which is kind of a no-brainer, and the Hell Knights, which are so iconic that we got to bring them back. But then we also have ones that are more exploring kind of the changes to the setting as well. We have the Knights of Last Wall with Tyrant's Grasp AP. There's a lot of bad stuff that happened in Last Wall.
Spoilers.
And the Knights are suddenly more motivated to get out there and kind of take the fight to Tarbafon and his armies and stuff. So we wanted to present the Knights of Last Wall as they kind of are presented at the current stage in the settings timeline. And that's one of the organizations we can cover. And we also wanted to make sure it wasn't just the whole always Avestan all the time. So we even went down to the Molly Expanse and covered what is pretty much the most important magic academy in the entire Nifty region, the Magambia. So we have info on those as well. And as we were putting these together, we started kind of mapping things around and kind of deciding, how are these kind of related to different player options or different archetypes or player types. And we realized that with the Pathfinder Society, we covered neutral players, and Magambia covered neutral good, and Pathfinder Society the Knights of Last Wall covered lawful good, and the Hell Knights covered the majority of lawful. We didn't have anything for that's a big chaotic organization. So we actually came up with a brand new one called the Firebrands, which are kind of just into adventure for the fun of it more than anything else.
Oh gosh, they're yellow adventurers.
It kind of actually. It turns out that they have, depending on who you know, they have different faces. On the surface, they just look like, hey, we wear gaudy clothing and go out and do adventuring and yell in the middle of the street about how we're the greatest adventurer of all time. But also, they go around and help people that are in need, that are facing oppression or tyranny, because they were kind of inspired by the Silver Ravens and the revolutions down in Sargava, which has now been renamed Vidrian as a new nation, and all this freedom fighter aspect kind of molded together with this whole just flamboyant, exciting, adventuring aspect to become this weird mishmash of just let's go have fun and save the world by looking good aspect.
Is that at all a reference to Firefly then? The Firebrands?
Nope. At least not intentionally. I was looking up. I originally pitched the idea for the group, but I didn't have a name. I saw it as a kind of like the Rebel Alliance meets the kind of anonymity thing that you can do online now with groups like Anonymous to go help people and hide behind the veil that is the Firebrands. But looking up different words to try to figure out, I realized, Firebrand means someone who's passionate about something, particularly revolution. I'm like, that just sounds like a cool word. I'm going to go with that. And then later James Jacobs said, okay, we'll go with that word.
We do have a couple of questions from chat. They are not about this book specifically. Okay. So maybe we'll wrap things up about this book. Param, other questions about the character guide?
He had questions about the NPCs.
Yeah, how do you make a monster tied to, like, what does a Firebrand gelatinous cube look like?
All right. So in addition to the organizations, which each have their own archetypes and like player options, we then have a nice little NPC gallery that it's like, here's a couple Firebrands you can use for your game, or here's some Hell Knights or Knights of Blastwall that you can use for your game. It's just as a GM, it's very useful to have those if you encounter the organizations. And then after that, we have these things called theme templates, which are kind of like the templates that you're used to from first edition, where you can add abilities onto a creature, and then that modifies it, be they suddenly they're advanced creatures or suddenly they're vampires and stuff like that. So each of the organizations that I've mentioned has a theme template that will modify the creature, and it's based on the level of the creature. So if you're a Firebrand at first level, if you apply it to a first level creature, they suddenly they're good at acrobatics and athletics because they jump around a lot. They're flashy and showy. But as you go higher in level, then you start adding things like, now they have the ability to cast heroism once per day, or they have a particular feat that is something that you can get from the Firebrand section, which lets you keep fighting on because of your determination to do good or to get home and tell the story that you want to tell. So you can apply these to any creature, be they just a typical NPC stat block, or as you mentioned, a gelatinous ooze.
The answer to your question is a cube that is very good at swinging from chandeliers.
And we even
Twig wants to know if oozes can even benefit from heroism.
I think so. I don't see why they couldn't. I don't remember by the rule. I mean, it should be a status bonus to attack an AC or something like that. So I don't think oozes are immune to being heroic in any way.
This is now going to be an campaign error. Thank you.
So we cover all the 5 organizations that are the main focus here, but we also cover things like, the Eldori Sword Lords and the Lion Blades and the Red Mantis and stuff. So you can do more than just those 5 organizations. We talked about a lot of organizations in World Guide, in the first Lost Omens World Guide, and we wanted to make sure you can make characters, or at least NPCs, that cover those organizations as well that were already mentioned.
I know that you said in Lost Omens World Guide, each of the 10 regions only had 1 archetype, so it does feel like that left a lot of what could have been archetypes in each region unexplored. So it sounds like you're really picking up a lot of what could have fit into the World Guide, what could have been alternate archetypes at the end of each chapter, and putting them into the character guide.
Yeah, we're trying to cover as much as we can, as quickly as we can. So partially because I know there's a lot of players who want to be able to recreate their first edition characters, and without the proper options for that, it's really hard to do so.
Hidden Twig wants to know if there's any guess on how many of these options are available for PFS.
Oof, I don't.
Please direct all PFS questions to Linda Zayas Palmer, new head of Pathfinder Society.
We will.
I know there is a plan to pretty easily buy into an organization early on in your career as a member or as a player in Pathfinder Society. I don't know the specifics of it, but I think it should be easy enough to get at least any of the organizations presented in the character guide pretty early on and without much of a hassle.
It would seem like it would be a counterintuitive to introduce these new lines and rarity system, and then like one of the big reasons to buy these books and have physical copies was just completely cut off.
Yeah, no, I definitely want as many people to become Firebrands as possible right away.
So there's 2 other books. Now, I know you can't talk too much about these ones, especially one that is like way in the future. But the one after the character guide is Gods and Magic, and it has an updated cover that has the World Stone, on it?
Starstone.
The Starstone on it.
Yes.
Yep.
So what can you tell us about Gods and Magic, and why we should be totally excited and pre-ordering that immediately?
Well, it has gods and also magic.
No way.
If you remember my analogy where Lost Omens World Guide was the Inner Sea World Guide and Character Guide was Inner Sea Races, and I guess the Adventurers Guide. Gods and Magic is Inner Sea Gods, where we kind of go back and bring everyone up to speed if you're a new player about all the core deities, because the core rulebook doesn't have much space to talk about them, but also cover some of the less popular or less mainstream deities within the Inner Sea region. So if you ever checked out books like Inner Sea Face or Face of Golarion, you would have seen things like, Achikek is in here, or Alceta, or Kyrgyz, the Strongman, who are not the core 20, but still pretty important and have a big influence. So we talk about those deities as well. And then also at the end of Inner Sea Gods, we had this big, huge table that kind of told you all the information, like every single deity, what their favorite color, their favorite animal, their favorite weapon, all the domains they grant, stuff like that. We try to replicate that and get as many deities in from first edition as quickly as possible with that table. So if you missed out on worshiping the ancient Osiriani gods and want to do that right away in second edition, go check that chart. It's ready to go.
Yeah, we wanted to catch up, like with the character options. We want to catch up on your gods as fast as possible. To that end, we have crammed, and I do mean crammed, all the information that you need to play a god into, or at least the gods we've listed in this chart. There's over 100 of them. That's not nearly anywhere near as many gods that we actually have in Pathfinder, but we think we hit a lot of the big hits. And it has, the anathema, the edicts, the cleric benefits, all that stuff. So you can just pick it out. It won't have as much flavor as the gods that get pages in this book, but you can pick it up. You can play your cleric of it. You can run your Mummy Mass campaign in second edition.
So I have 3 questions. Well, I basically have 3 gods to sort of probe the depth of the and you just tell me how they're represented in the book. The first one is Milani.
Milani has an entry, a full entry.
Okay.
Or I guess one of the demigod entries, which are not as big as the core.
Well, not demigod entries, but
yeah. Well,
she has 1 page.
She has 1 page.
Let's go with
Wonderful.
that.
All right. Grandmother Spider.
She has 1 page.
Oh, wow. She got page status. I didn't expect that.
Well, we love her, so we got to get her in.
The Imperial Lords.
They have a whole section that talks about 6 or 7 of them all together. Plus, they're in the chart in the back.
Yeah, so we have like a 4-page spread describing some of the most popular of them. And the most popular ones made it into the chart in the back, so you can pick them out and play them.
So you can, if you're a worshiper of Arshea, you can hop back into it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, there's some that we don't have because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, not enough space, but we I think got a good mix of popular ones and ones that we found interesting or would like to see more information on in the world.
Yeah, we consulted John Compton on some of the most popular ones in organized play so that we could get those in there and let people update their characters.
I expected to stump you with the Imperial Lords. I'm impressed.
Nope.
Easy.
Easy peasy.
It looks like chat's going the end on this game. Darth Imerus wants to know if Ragathiel is in there. Bard Wannabe wants to know
He's
about
on that
Zoas.
list, yeah. Zols is on that list as well, yep.
And Dungeon Novice wants to know about Besmara.
Besmara has a single page dedicated to the pirate queen.
She got a page!
Yeah.
Right.
And Leather Being wants to know about the Green Mother.
Oh, the Green Mother is part of the eldest section.
Wow, this is it's because it got again, this is a book that's kind of emulating a book that was literally twice its size. I didn't expect you guys to dig as deep as you did, so bravo.
And in addition to all that cool information, then we of course have some player options for you. So we have new domains that you can take with these new deities, or existing deities can swap in these domains with some of the options we present, and new spells and new feats and new equipment. So we have new deities that require brand new weapons that didn't exist before, like Cassandra needs her technological weapon, which is now presented here. Technological. She has her favorite weapon, which is not anything like a long sword or a dagger or anything like that.
So you mentioned this is gods and magic, and so far we've talked a lot about gods and god-based magic. How much is the magic side of this, or is this really mostly gods?
There's a lot of new spells. There's a whole section of new spells there. We have ways for every character class to benefit from the worship of one of these deities, or even the philosophies that we include, like the Green Faith, without having to take a dedication into cleric or champion.
I like that. That was something that Pathfinder brought that I thought 3.5 could have done more with, the idea that you can be a worshiper of a god beyond being a divine caster.
One of the more fun things we have here is what we're calling divine intercessions, which are not anything you can buy into mechanically, but they're more for GMs to use. If you are a worshiper of, let's say, Iomade, but you're a fighter, if you please Iomade, your GM can look at this divine intercession section and say, oh, hey, I want to give him a blessing from Iomade, but I don't know what to do. I don't want to just give him a longsword or cast a buff on him. We have a list of different options that you can present. It's like, oh, here's a major boon that Iomade can grant you for helping save the day and liberating her people and saving her cathedral and stuff like that. And you can get this cool boon that your GM can use to reward you or to curse you if you
really
slight one of the gods.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing, we wanted these divine intercessions for the core 20 to give a little more nuance. For one, give them more presence in Golarion, because usually they don't do anything. You can't have your god interfering. They just come down and solve everything, and then another god shows up, and then you just all get the popcorn while they duke it out. But we wanted them to be able to interact with Golarion and have more presence, but it also have a bit more nuance when interacting with their clerics. What was Iomede's minor curse?
Her minor curse, I don't remember exactly. I remember one of her major curses is whenever your weapon is cursed, and as soon as you attack with it, it immediately shatters. So don't take off Iomade, because you will never be able to fight properly again.
Well, those are major curses, but there's also really minor ones, like your deity just sort of leans down from the heavens and gives you a little slap on the cheek. Because there's some anathemas where you can get into a situation where the adventurer is no, you must offend your god to proceed, and we don't want you to lose all your cleric powers. And so maybe you have to offend Shaylin by smashing every portrait in the gallery, or the adventure just doesn't let you proceed. And your GM shouldn't strip your cleric powers, but maybe Shaylin's just going to lean down and
Yeah. I remember, I think a minor one for Abadar is just you find it harder to broker deals, and you take a penalty to diplomacy until the curse goes away.
Oh no, my deals. Chad has asked where Razmir, the living god, fits in.
Now, this makes me only 90% sure that they're not secretly Jason.
Rasmir was just too powerful for this book to contain.
We couldn't afford his fee. His appearance fee is just way too much.
All right, so this actually, I'm a lot more excited about this book than I was a minute ago, which was already excited, but now I've got tangible reasons to drool and lust after it. But the next book, we barely have any info on. It is Absalom, the City of Lost Ages?
City of Lost Omens.
Lost Omens.
To keep that Lost Omens in the title there.
Why are we getting that? Why are we getting a big old book about that conveniently near several things that has to do with that city?
I couldn't possibly imagine.
The magic of foresight is a powerful one indeed. We first off, it's what we have touted many times as the most important city in the Inner Sea region. It's the jewel of the Inner Sea, and we've had one softcover book about 11 years ago that covered it in depth, and that's about it. We go back to it plenty of times in Pathfinder Society and other times here and there, but in terms of taking a deep dive, we haven't had a chance to do so for a long time, and we wanted to present this wonderful tome that would be just like the go-to, hey, I can have an entire campaign with just this book and then the core rules and be set to go. I could go from level 1 to 20 here, which we're even going to do within a whole AP for that. But I could set my entire campaign here for the rest of second edition with all the information that we have here. We want to give you all the in-depth of the districts and the NPCs and the history and culture of Absalom. And we thought early on in the life of Pathfinder is the perfect time to do that because it's such an important city in the setting that we want it to be an important book to the game as well.
Black Tiger 1969 says the Absalom book wouldn't have anything to do with the upcoming AP, would it?
They inform each other. I mean, there's a lot of we're getting questions from other developers of like, oh, how does this look in the Absalom book and stuff like that, and we're coordinating to make sure that things go hand in hand. So if you ever go into a district of a city during the Agents of Edgewatch campaign and need to know a bit more because, oh, hey, I'm a player and I want to learn more about the area, or I'm a GM and I want to do a few side quests here, then you can immediately just turn over to the Absalom book and get all of that information and have it ready to go.
So to be clear, we're talking about Agents of Edgewatch, which is the AP that is going to be the third
after the circus one.
After the circus one,
which is
the Extinction Curse.
Yeah.
And it takes place entirely within the city of Absalom. They have said during the panels, at no point will you leave the city of Absalom.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I'm sure you can if you tried.
Yeah. I mean, the adventure won't intentionally take you out of Absalom. There's nothing saying, there's no invisible barrier that forces you to stay in as players.
All right, we are nearing 2 hours on this interview. I think a good question to end with is Darth 3 Myers. Yes. In a general sense, what else can we look forward to in the Lost Omens line?
Well, a lot of what we want to do is cover what we already haven't covered in first edition. It's very easy to immediately turn around and say, okay, now let's do the Saga Lands book and look at Varissia all over again, even though we've done that quite a bit, or look at Old Chaliax all over again. We want to, when it makes sense, go and explore new parts of the setting, even if it's parts that maybe we touched on just a little bit, but haven't, taken a deep dive into it. For example, we saw the Mwangi Expanse just a little bit during the Serpent Skull AP, and then haven't done too much since. So we'd love to be able to go back there or go to different regions like Vudra or Arcadia and stuff like that. Cover what we want, but also just more interesting stuff. It doesn't all have to be, this is this region, and now this region, and now this region. As you can see with even just like the character guide that covers something that's kind of different than the typical geography book that you're seeing.
Some people in chat are they're cheerleading for Arcadia.
Yeah, there's a lot of Arcadia.
Me too.
Please direct all requests for future products to Eric Mona, publisher. Email him, tweet him, place threads on the forum.
Okay.
Anything else?
Actually, I do have one minor question. It's the Zubit
Is
question.
it about when the frog humus is going to be added? Because I've been on Luis about that for a while.
I think that's going to be it. We need to talk to somebody that's doing a bestiary for that. Not so
Nope,
much.
doesn't matter. Anyone that'll listen, you need more frog humus.
No. Very famously, about halfway through the production of the Player's Guide, they were redesigned, they were reimagined to be much more visual. They had the big full-page spread. You started using the inside cover so much, and it was like very often quoted, we were inspired by Zoo Books. Are there any big inspirations that you guys are using for how the world guides are being put together?
Partially, we're just finding inspiration where we can, like we mentioned with Sarah bringing in, like, here's what a cool snapshot of an area looks like from a tourism book. It was perfect for the Inner Sea World Guide, and we're looking at books from even just other games that we've played before. I know we've had other RPGs brought up as examples of cool layout that we use for that kind of inspired things like the sidebars that you're seeing in the core rule book or in the world guide books and stuff. So there's inspiration all over the place, and I think partially what we've been seeing is we have ideas for books that are based on, I had this cool book back in the day, I'd love to see that book show up again, and use those as kind of a jumping off point for cool stuff. Which I wish I could talk more about things like that.
Yes, we want you all to continue to work on these books and not get fired.
Yes.
So
I'll just say that if you follow the logical order, a World Guide 4 and then 5 and then 6 and 7 might not be out of the question.
For the ones that have been announced, can you remind people when they can expect to get their hands on them?
Yes. So the first book in the Lost Omens Guide, Lost Omens World Guide, comes out on Wednesday officially. Should be hitting stores by then. You might have it already if you're a subscriber, or you can go pre-order it right now. Lost Omens Character Guide comes out in October, and then Gods and Magic comes out in January, and I believe the Absalom book is slated for April or May, one of those two. I think it might be closer to May than April for that. And then following tradition, it's every 3 months after that.
All right. So where can people find you, reach you, find out more about the awesome things you are always doing?
I hang out on the No Direction Discord a lot.
Yeah, you do.
And answer questions and chat with people there. My online presence, I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Donato Classic. I'm sure I can shoot a link somewhere. I'm also on the message boards because, hey, Paizo staff are on the message boards here and there. So see us on there too.
I hide in a cave under a rock. But you can always ping me on the Paizo message boards if you really want my attention.
So that rock gets Wi-Fi.
Yes. It's a sophisticated rock.
Ooh. Is that like our super ooze we were talking about earlier?
Yes. Heroic rock with the Wi-Fi theme template.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us. This was actually, I think we went on much longer than anyone really was anticipating.
Cool stuff coming down the line. So.
Yeah.
It was exciting, and it's talking about stuff we haven't had a chance to talk about in the last couple of years. Basically, since TUI was announced, there's been so much of a crunch focus.
We'll show you a quarter of the
poster
map.
The World Guide comes with a poster map that has two different sides, actually. It has a more stylized side that kind of is a fun player one, and then there's full on, here's the political map and all the borders and all the different map tags. 5 billion map tags. So, 8-panel
poster size.
Yeah, comes with every copy of the Lost Omens World Guide.
Are there going to be more maps and books, or is that just a one-off?
Yeah, there are definitely going to be plans for maps when it makes sense. It'd be very hard to have an Absalom book without a map. So, you can probably, it's a safe bet that will have a map.
Excellent.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Well, thank you both. Thank you both again for joining us. We are going to be back in just a minute to wrap things up, but for now, bye. We'll see you Why, it's going to be not until next year that we see you in person. All right. Well, we'll see you online.
Yes, we'll be around.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be right back to wrap things up right after this.
Wrap up and shut. Oh, there you go.
Okay, so we got locked out of this computer and we can't disconnect ourselves from the call. So we'd love for you to kick us from the call so we can.
All right, 1 second here. So
Please
this is
hang
all
on
getting
us.
recorded, so
While the wrap-ups and shout-outs plays over it.
yeah, I'm gonna totally redo that here in a minute. And then do that and that button. And then hold on, I'm gonna bring up 2 up. Okay. So anybody still watching this live, show's not over. We got a little bit of wrap-ups first, then the show will be over. But because y'all didn't get to hear it, here is the transition.
Wrap-ups and shout-outs. Wrap-ups and shout-outs. Wrap-ups. Wrap-ups and shout-outs.
And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 206. Right? Probably.
Sure. We're gonna go with that.
All right.
I'm gonna like it.
Episode 206 of the No Direction podcast, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews show. Before we go, normally we would, have shout outs and stuff here, but there was a bit of news that it's too important not to talk about right now. We'll go into depth in the future, but the first 2E errata came out, and we do have the bullet points here.
Yeah.
And I just want to go through the bullet points. At some point, we're going to be talking about each class specifically and going in depth. And when we do, we will make sure that these are all brought up, to make sure that the word gets out that the core rulebook has been, there's been some rules changes to the core rulebook. First of all, humans are supposed to have 1 more language. It's supposed to be common +1.
So this is going to be, are we using the Nilsson DC post on Reddit for this?
I'm using the one we got that was shared in our Discord.
Okay, same post.
Not linked.
Okay,
same post. Okay,
yeah, these were originally compiled by Nilsson DC over on Reddit on the Pathfinder 2E Reddit group.
And sorry, but what's the original source? Like this is
they watched the live stream and then bullet pointed what they talked about during the live stream on the Pathfinder Friday last week.
All right. So humans are supposed to have 1 more language, supposed to be common in another one. Whatever proficiency you have in simple weapons, you should have in unarmed, if unarmed is not listed. And it says including wizard, which wizards are not proficient in all simple weapons. And therefore, I think it's saying that wizards are untrained in unarmed strike. Again, this is in bullet form. This is something we'll get a little more information on in the future. The books explicitly says they are trained in unarmed strike, but if we're to read this here, because they're not trained in all simple weapons, they would not be trained in unarmed strike.
I'm thinking I'm reading this the other way, is that they're trained in unarmed strike, and they're calling them out specifically because they're the only class that isn't automatically trained in all simple weapons.
Okay, but it specifically says they're trained in unarmed strike. So the reason I was reading it that way is because it's like, well, this is an errata. They've got to be changing what's printed, right?
Do not know. Confused.
Okay, so that'll be something that we'll have to wait for some clarification on. Monks use wisdom for monk key spells. That's something I have a lot of opinions about, and can't wait till we talk about the monk class to talk about the repercussions of that.
Yeah, they did talk about this a little bit before release, but that didn't get out there very far.
Well, it was also when we talked to Logan Bonner, who was the primary designer on the monk, from the way the design team talked about it, he said specifically, like I specifically asked about wisdom and monks, and we were told that they made a conscious choice to move away from it. But then word since then has been, no, wisdom should have been a little more integrated into the monk rules. So again, I have thoughts. Sorcerers get resolve at level 17. That one's straightforward. Wizards do not get a wizard feat at level 1. So there's a few of the primary casters don't get a class feat at level 1.
Right. Druid,
wizard
cleric.
Actually. Yeah. But the wizard does, but it shouldn't have. It says unless you're a universalist. Now, the way the universalist is written, it says you get an extra wizard feat, but it doesn't say when. So I think this is what's specifically being clarified. 1, that the chart is wrong. and 2, that's when you get the Universalist. That's when you get the bonus feat for being a Universalist. Adventurer's Pack is 1 bulk. We knew that was coming for a while. And spending your hero point to avoid death takes you to 0 hit points, not 1 HP.
Now that's
Aaron,
important because in the rule
distinction?
book, they were printed in 2 different versions. One that took you at 1 HP but didn't clear any of your conditions, and one that took you to 0 HP but cleared all the bad stuff off your character so that when you came up, you were at least in fighting shape. Instead of just immediately going right back down again if you had a persistent damage effect on you, for example. And of those 2, because it's literally printed in 2 different ways in the books, there was a lot of confusion, especially during like PFS sessions, and they went around during Gen Con and letting tables know that it was the 0 hit point version that was printed as the one that is correct, and the 1 hit point version is a remnant from an old version of the playtest that is not correct any longer.
So it's not that many changes for the first errata. I don't know if we're going to expect more before the core rulebook goes to a second printing. Probably.
Yeah, because I already know of like several I know of at least 2 other things in the book that are wrong that need to be addressed.
Right. Well, anyway, if you are playing Second Edition, these are things to be aware of. I think probably the most significant one is the Wizard Feat. Although the monk using using wisdom, that's like a big change, but I don't know how many monks are built with key spells. Anyway, there's no reason for me to be regrading these. So that's episode 206. Param, did you have anything to shout out to?
No, just have fun, everybody, and make sure you're visiting our chat over at Discord, the chillest place for the Paizo fan community to hang out. We keep it really nice in there. And of course, a lot of Paizo people like to hang out in there. Like Luis just said, he's definitely one of them. Though it's cheating with Luis because he's also a member of the network. All the No Direction staff are in there. A lot of our fans are in there. Just sort of have fun. You can find the link to get to our Discord on our website at nodirectionpodcast.com, which is where you'll also find links to our YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all the socials. And of course, here at twitch.tv/nodirection is another place you can reach us. And if you want to email us, you can do so at nodirectionpodcast@hotmail.com. Or is it nodirection@hotmail.com?
Right? I am going to request that you make a shout out to today's guest blogger.
Oh, yes. Today's guest blogger. And I want to get his full name right, so sorry for the delay here. But our guest author here is... Oh, man.
It's definitely Rob.
It's Rob. I know it's Rob, but I always get his last name mangled. Sorry, Rob. Please forgive me. He didn't sign it.
Rob, Pontius or Pontius?
See, that is why I always screw it up. But Rob Pontius, I'm going to go with Pontius. Rob, please forgive us. But Rob was real cool. I met him at Gen Con. We played some games together. We played a game together. Then we kept bumping into each other. And he is one of the newbies over at Order of the Amber Die. He plays Ezrin right now. They just released the blog for their completion of book 5. It's worth a fun read to see what people just like super dedicated to a gaming experience do. They do not live play. They do not record these things. They blog about them, which is a very unique way to present gaming.
It's like they're just spreading a legend, and there is no tangible proof of what actually happened.
And so it was Rob's first Gen Con. I found out not his first ever Gen Con. He went once like 10 years ago, which is when I went. But he was just like in complete marvel throughout the entire con, like full-fledged fanboy and like a massive level of enthusiasm, which is something I don't get to see a lot because I'm a jaded old timer. And he mentioned wanting to write up about his experience, and I was like, hey, content's great. And so hinted at that. And so he did a cool guest blog about his experiences going through Gen Con as somebody who hasn't been in a while and seeing this through fresh eyes, especially post the explosion of the popularity of role-playing game that's happened in the last few years. It's a fun read. Definitely go check it out. He's very active in other circles that I also care about, like the gamers and, of course, Order of the Amber Die and participating in Extra Life and all good things that I super support.
Yeah, it's just a nice read. Like, it's just full of positivity. I
Mhm.
really enjoyed reading it.
Yep. So definitely looking forward to reading that, and I hope I bump into Rob at some conventions again soon.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.